Hello guys, today I'm doing a little bit of a different style of video. I'm going to be doing a verbal session on gathering information inside of League of Legends. I think this is one of those things that is very important to the game, but just isn't being talked about a whole lot. Um, this video is inspired by a study that I've read on how cognitive flexibility uh, correlates with your expertise in MOBA games. League of Legends included, of course. So you might be asking, what the hell is cognitive flexibility and how does it even relate to gathering information? Well, cognitive flexibility refers to the ability to shift attention between tasks, stimulus, responses, perspectives, or strategies, right? What this basically means in League of Legends is your ability to shift your focus from one thing to another, right? For example, from top lane's wave state to mid lane's roam to jungle camps to jungle camp timers to items, basically everything inside of the game, right? Gathering information is probably the most important foundational skill in any strategy game, and there's no exception in League of Legends as well. So, coaching and other form of educational content typically doesn't really talk about gathering information. So the way that coaching content works these days is a player listens to a coach and the coach explains why decision A is better than decision B, why the client should have done decision A and not decision B, but rarely does it consider the fact that maybe the client didn't have the information that the coach does to make the decision, the correct decision. Um, Usually you'll see this type of thing happen and coaches will explain their reasoning behind doing something and then the client will say, "Oh yeah, I should have definitely done that. That was my mistake. I would have done that." But in reality, while the client is in game, they might not actually have the information to be able to do the decision, right? Now, I'm not saying that there's nobody talking about this, but I'm definitely saying that this concept is under the radar and isn't being focused on as much as it should be, because this is actually very important. Because right now, in the League of Legends community, in content creation specifically, there is plenty, there is an abundance of content that tells you how to discern which decision is correct. How do you do the correct decision? Why you should do this and that and not this and that. There is a bunch of videos you can find uploaded daily on bunch of a variety of YouTube channels, right? And Twitch streams and etc., right? But very few channels actually talk about gathering information. And today I wanted to talk about it a little bit more, at least maybe start some discussion about it. So, if gathering information is so important and it can be the difference between being bronze and challenger, how do I actually improve on it, you might ask? Well, I have a couple of points that I want to bring up today, and you can see them down here. So the number one is having your camera unlocked. Now, many people probably already do have their camera unlocked, but I know that there's an abundance of players that still play inside this little comfort window of having your camera on your character at all times, and this is one of the worst things you can actually do as a player. You're already having a disadvantage against your opponents if you play with the camera constantly focused on you, right? There's so much stuff happening around the map, and the League of Legends map isn't actually that big. Like, if you're very good at controlling your camera, you can probably have information on all three lanes in jungle um, pretty pretty often, right? Like you can shift your camera from top to mid to bot pretty often if you build a habit of doing it. But a lot of people still have their camera on them constantly, all the time. And basically what this does is just doesn't allow you to gather as much information as you would need to make the correct decision. So if you're one of these people that still has their camera locked and you're thinking it's not such a big deal, right? Like it's definitely not that big of a deal. I feel worse with the camera unlocked. I play worse. That might be true, but after you play 10 to 20 games with your camera unlocked, you're going to see what a marginal, huge difference there is uh, in terms of being able to see stuff happening on the map. And the second point that I've written down is very connected to being able to control your camera, and that is F keys. So a lot of people um, know about the existence of F keys and how you can use them, but a lot of people don't actually care enough to do that. I mean, you can technically just pan your camera and get the same exact thing done. It's just a little bit less time efficient. But for anyone that could consider themselves good at League of Legends, so I'm saying Masters plus players, you need to look for small advantages over your opponents. And being able to effectively use F keys is a very, very good advantage that you could get for yourself. Being able to see stuff that maybe your opponent laner doesn't see, and being able to do it very quickly without actually having to suffocate yourself by moving your mouse all the way down to the map, pressing, then pressing back on another lane. This is basically just a very fast way of gathering information. And it's something that I would recommend all players in higher brackets of skill to focus on. The next thing I want to talk about is looking at tab. So what does that even do, you might ask? What the hell does looking at tab do? A lot of people press tab just out of habit. It doesn't actually give them anything. But pressing tab and knowing where to look at what time is also a very important skill. Let's say you're a jungler, right? Let's say I'm a jungler and I'm going to gank bot lane. Now, if I don't press tab and go do a gank, I don't really know what damage should I expect. I don't really know what my teammates can do at the current time because maybe my bot lane died beforehand and maybe the enemy AD carry has a BF sword while my AD carry has Skull. I don't press tab, I just look at them, they have the same amount of health. I don't really have any idea what's about to happen. I run into the lane and then the enemy AD carry just happens to kill me very quickly. And my AD carry doesn't do the same thing. And then I'm mad at my AD carry because what the hell? How can this happen? My bot lane lost so hard, he's so strong. Well, no, that's actually just your fault because you're unable to have the correct information to know that the play you're doing is actually wrong. So, as a jungler, for example, you should always tab and look at the opponents and the enemy jungler's items before you do a play. This is very, very important in mid to late game when item completions become a very important thing and they end up deciding fights. So if one AD carry has IE completed and the other one doesn't, and you go for a dragon fight, the chances are you're going to probably have a very unlucky and unfavorable outcome. And on the contrary, if you have a teammate that just completed his item while the opposing one didn't, the chances that you're going to win are higher. So you should look to push towards a play like so. So for example, right, there are champions that spike really hard when they get their Blade of the Ruined King, whether it be Master Yi, Irelia, um, some other champion. When those champions get that item, they become a lot stronger. So if you have one item and they have one item, it's probably likely that they're going to be a little bit, if not a lot stronger than you. So let's say you have a mid lane matchup of, I don't know, Twisted Fate versus Irelia. And you're a jungler and you decide, okay, I'm going to gank mid lane. You see that Twisted Fate has Rod of Ages and Irelia has Bork, and you're like, this is going to be easy peasy. It's both of them have one item. TF should probably be able to do as much damage as Irelia, and that's fucking wrong. If you're gonna gank that lane, unless the setup is really good and you have a lot of damage yourself, Irelia is just gonna end up 1v2ing you. You're gonna maybe put your mid laner behind. You're gonna waste your time. You're not gonna actually have the damage to kill her before she actually kills you. Now, obviously, uh, you have to consider all the other variables, but this is what gathering information is all about. Being able to know what items do what, and being able to know when those items have come in the game, and when those items should be looked at and should be respected. Because a big part of League of Legends, even though Riot is trying to change that, is item spikes. It has been a big part of League of Legends since the very beginning. There is a huge difference between having Rabadon and not having Rabadon on a champion, right? The AP difference can be up to 2 times. Like you can have your mid laner can have 300 AP and one needlessly large rod, and the enemy mid laner could have 550 AP because they have their Rabadon finished. Even though, let's say, the actual gold difference of the players is like only 200, but they got the base beforehand. So this is one of those things. I don't want to expand much more than I already have, but looking at your scoreboard, looking at tab, and actually looking at items, completions, and maybe even deducing when a player will get what item and when you can fight for what objective is very important. Now, this doesn't only apply to junglers. I talk about junglers' perspective a lot because I play jungle myself, but this actually works for every single lane. And I think top laners are ones to actually respect item completions a lot. Like people know that if Yone gets Bork, I can't really fight him up until I get another item. But there are plenty of players like supports that will force a roam on a lane because they think numbers advantage is gonna be more is gonna have more impact than item advantage, and this is just basically how you lose games. So the next point is learning to track something. Now this is very vague in essence, like this doesn't actually say anything, but the same way we're able to track when our minion wave is going to come through our minimap and deduce when the enemy wave is going to come through the minimap because they're mirrored, right? We can track the enemy champion's locations on the map. So let's say you recall and you're playing a champion with tier 1 boots. You know that the enemy also has tier 1 boots. When you're moving back to lane, you can tell roughly where the enemy champion is. Um, because you run at the same amount of movement speed. And if the champion doesn't show up in lane the same time as you already know that perhaps they took a different route. Maybe they waited for an item. Maybe they just walked to another part of the map and you still can't see them. This is important information to have. Just because they're in fog of war doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have any idea of where your opponent is. The map is only so big and you should always be looking to track where the hell the opponent is. Now, there will be a lot of different instances of this. So for example, sometimes your laner bases and you can feel it in your like heart that your opponent should be back in lane by now. And then you start getting worried. Well, he's not back, he must be roaming, and you start pinging a roam. This is basically the thing I'm trying to talk about, but there is a way to actually look at the map, look at their stats, look at their movement speed, know their abilities, and be able to deduce when they're actually going to be back in lane with a pretty small margin of error. If you actually master the skill, it's going to be a lot easier to get surprised. It's going to be a lot easier to be prepared to punish bad plays, punish bad roams, and this is one of those things where you can learn to track almost anything inside of the game. So as a jungler, as a jungle player myself, one of the most important things to be able to do is to track the enemy jungler because being able to inform your team with pings where the enemy jungler is can be, well, literally the difference between winning and losing a game. Now, how you do this is pretty different, but in essence the same, right? You have to have vision the first time of the enemy jungler, and then When you look at the champion they're playing, you know the clear speed that they have, you know where they're pathing towards. You can roughly have an idea when the enemy jungler will be anywhere on the map. You don't need wards, you just need to spot them once, and after that you can basically have an idea of where the enemy jungler can and can't be at any point of the game. This is something that will make you skyrocket if you haven't already been doing it. Uh, it will increase your elo by a whole lot if you learn to track the enemy jungler if you haven't been doing that before. And the last thing, so by the way, just to come back to tracking something, it's not only tracking champions, right? It's tracking waves, tracking the opposing laners, the opposing junglers. It's tracking ability cooldowns, tracking. Yeah, I mean, this is in essence mostly what I'm talking about. Being able to track, having a mental idea of where someone is, where somebody can be, and where somebody cannot be. And the last thing that I want to talk about is understanding body language. Now, what does that mean? In League of Legends, just like in real life, people are emotional. And not only that, but people play differently based on the information that they have. So, for example, if I know that my jungler is going top, and I'm a top laner who is getting pushed in, I'm incentivized not to trade, not to force my opponent to back off, and just wait for my jungler and then be able to collapse on the opponent and kill them. In other instances, if the wave, for example, is pushing towards my opponent's tower and my jungler wants to gank, I might look to trade aggressively to force my opponent to trade back, use a important cooldown, and then my jungler can swoop in and kill them. These micro clicks, expressions, whatever you want to call them in the game, they aren't super easy to see, but when you start actually looking at them, they're pretty obvious. If you go and look at your replays and you go look at 100 times that you've been ganked and you look at how your opponent started playing 10 to 15 seconds or 5 to 10 seconds before the gank happened, you'll see that there's a big difference in how they move their character, how they throw their abilities, what they do in the lane, where they stand inside of the lane, and being able to just reflect on this information and understand that, wow, if my opponent does this and this probably means that I'm gonna be ganked very soon. So it's another thing that is just giving you information constantly, your opponent's body language. You just need to be able to understand it and make use of it. And all of these things that I mentioned today, they're all very, well, sort of say hard to implement into your game instantly, right? Like being able to play with F keys and looking at your tab and then being able to track somebody in fog of war and look at body language seems very daunting. These things sort of are little habits that you build into big habits over time. So, how do you realistically even make these things appear inside of your games? Well, for stuff like unlocked camera and F keys, all it really takes is just some practice. Like you only have to play a set amount of games before you just feel comfortable using F keys and having your camera unlocked. So my recommendation would be just go on a different account, an alt account that's lower rank, or even play normal games, and just unlock your camera the whole time and try to use F keys. You will probably die a lot in your first 10 to 20 to, I don't know, maybe a little more games. But by the end of it, when you actually master having your camera unlocked, when you master pressing F keys and gathering information, the difference between the player you were and you are now will be so big that you can not possibly doubt in your mind that it's not worth losing those 10 or 20 normal games. Looking at tab is also something that's just, I mean, it just takes a little bit of practice, and all you have to be is you have to be cognitive, you have to be aware of what you're doing and what you're actually looking at. Like, the problem with players a lot of the time is that they don't actually think. They just play out of intuition or let's say they just autopilot, right? After some point, people don't really know what's a useful what's useful time or what's useful to do inside of the game, what's useful to think about. So they will just sort of like exist and play based off of their intuition, their muscle memory, whatever. That all doesn't really matter. What matters is that at every point of the game, you have a goal. You want to know you want to be able to execute that goal with most precision possible. So you have to gather all the information around that goal. For example, if my goal is to fight on dragon, like this is the goal I have. I really want to take a mountain dragon because I have many frontliners on my team. And I press tab and I look at who actually is stronger, whether it's my team or enemy team, whether it's a mix of my mid laners stronger but their bot lane stronger, and I want to kill their bot lane or like push their bot lane out of the lane before I go contest this objective. Like there's a whole bunch of ways you can think about this, and there's a lot of information that you should be considering like while you're trying to do these plays. Now you will say, so what do I do if my team has worse items but they still want to fight? You have to be able to make a or put your foot down and make a decision. You have to tell your team, no, this is not a good time to fight. We have a much better chance of winning the game 5 minutes later from now when the next dragon spawns and when we actually have our items completed. So stuff like that, um, I mean, it's very hard to talk about just like off the top of my head. I can't give very great examples, but this basically applies to everything inside of the game. Learning to track something isn't any different, right? You just have to be always conscious of doing it. You have to always be aware of doing it. You never want to autopilot. You never want to waste time not looking at anything. Like if you're a jungler and you watch yourself while you full clear your camps, like you're just wasting your time. You're just wasting precious time to actually be able to look at something else. And the last point is understanding body language. This thing just takes a little bit of time. I think this is one of those things where it's a lot harder to use practically in lower elo because in lower elo, a top laner that's gonna get gank for his own lane doesn't even fucking know it himself. People won't necessarily change the way they play based off of new information, so it's not that useful for lower elo players. But for everyone that's Master Plus, I would highly recommend to actually analyze your opponent's body language before ganks, after ganks, and you can even make use of this. This is something that you don't necessarily even need to do in game a lot. You can just look at these things on VOD reviews, and when you're inside of the game, you will automatically sort of see when your opponent is changing their body language because it will just be more obvious to you. So yeah, that's about all that I want to talk today about. Um, I hope somebody found this video useful, and I definitely hope that I can get some discussions in the comments. Yeah, guys, good luck. Take care.